and includes the ecological and forest resources map 6 of the town plan, and the green blocks are,
I guess priority looks like.
yeah, they're the priority forest blocks, you know,
Mhm.
based on the A&R data. The specific boundaries of it, if we were to begin to take a regulatory approach to thinking about the impact of development within those green areas, and I think it's my interpretation that that's the scope of any regulatory approach would be to be looking at development within those 3 large green areas and limited to those 3 large green areas at this point. There's also concern about road crossings, habitat crossings, and also about connectivity blocks, which allow paths between those large green blocks. That's a much looser area for me, and one I think that's more problematic from a regulatory point of view. But the thinking that has been going on, including looking, I have a similar list of that I can Xerox and share of other towns' town plan statements, and then the zoning that sort of followed or was related to that.
Excellent.
And they're all over the place. So in my mind, the goal today would be to try to clearly hear what is the issue that might be able to be addressed from a regulatory point of view. And if we can agree to that, the next step would be to define the borders of the areas of concern. And then perhaps we can understand a little bit more how we could begin to approach it from a regulatory point of view within the structure of Putney's limited resources.
And I'd just like to add to that, I did get in touch with Jens, and he is willing to talk with anybody here who has questions. He's probably willing to Zoom to a meeting if we ever get the Zoom fixed.
It's working
if
now.
that would be helpful, and he's worked with other.
You can send a note to
on this
everybody.
Project, so.
Yeah, he's reached out as well. I
Good.
haven't gotten back to him yet.
Good.
But yeah, it's on my list of things to do. So talk to you.
Because he's really helpful. We've spoken with the planning commission. We all know him.
Mhm.
We know him really well. The tracking program that he helped coordinate back in the day.
So we're clear about the goal, and are we in agreement about the goal? The goal is to consider zoning regulations that may address the impact of development within the 3 designated forest blocks at this point. The road crossings and connectors, I think we can, if you have more to talk about them today, that'd be great. Otherwise, I think we have to put it off because it's not as well delineated as the forest blocks.
I think putting forest blocks at the top, since we know the area we're talking about, that's already been delineated, discussed and delineated, is a very good place to start, but I would hate to see the modernization money not include identifying the connectors, which is also part of Act 171. But as Pip says, it's really going to be hard because we have a lot of data. We've got a ton of data, just an updated road crossing map from Jens and the Vermont Conservation Design. And as Jens says, on the ground tracking is really important. And that's a ton of data that a lot of towns do not have, and given the limited snow in southern Vermont now, probably won't have. Although I shouldn't say that, God knows what's gonna happen next. But I think we should figure out how, or river corridors, as in his report, Andrew pointed out that Jens and Fish and Wildlife also very much think that animals use rivers and streams as ways to move through the landscape. Hi, Ellen. She read the announcement right. We just began. Yeah. So we would also like to get someone this as well. But I think the major issue, and I think this is exactly right, if there's no big habitat for an animal to cross into, because it has benefits that they need, then who the hell needs a road crossing? I mean, if you develop.
Or do you want to promote that, right?
So definitely the big forest blocks come first, and
Yeah.
protecting that come first. I would say a big priority, definitely.
And
But I'd like to also not take off the table, trying to identify and provide, like even heightened, review process. I mean, if we figure riparian buffers that are the big deal, which we don't know right now. Then doing a heightened river corridor review process for certain areas might be relevant. Or I don't know, it's just all up in the air right now in that regard, because we don't have as much information, or we certainly don't have any decisions.
With that, may I just
Sure.
suggest that we
Okay.
really go in, I mean, I think we're not saying we'll only talk about forest blocks, but why don't we just dive into that and today and try to make as much progress on that as we can, and then as we wrap up, talk about what else there is to talk about and how we're gonna do it.
Because I have
So-
other issues too, but they're
yeah.
very minor, they're just formal.
Yeah, why don't we start with the big thing, the forest
Okay.
blocks, and I think that we could make a lot of progress on that today, it would be great. Yes.
That was to Ellen.
I signed in.
Oh,
I
I'll pass
just-
it back.
I've got everybody signed in too.
So, may I say something?
Yes,
I think forest block is the main focus, that's for sure. But without connecting, especially in town of Putney, this section,
mhm,
you cannot neglect that section. You
Mhm.
need to have some kind of, could be different kind of zoning regulation, but
Mhm.
still have to be connected.
yes, okay,
And that's one thing I felt that here.
yeah. I think as we clarify how we're defining the forest blocks for the purposes of zoning, that is a natural next thing to talk
Yeah.
about, the connective between them.
Because
So
I
thank
think
you, Koji, for bringing that up.
the way it's said is protect block of forest.
Mhm,
The block is a big important word.
yes,
And if it's not blocked anymore by further fragmentation, that is not any good protection,
Mhm.
I think. But kind of you guys better too. But this particular section of connecting 2 blocks or 3 blocks
mhm.
is some kind of, especially around
Yeah.
around the road.
No, I get it. So let's get on to, how do we define these? And
Well,
then, yeah,
I wanted to rope Andrew in for doing some map research, sort of as an advocate for the planning commission, to help facilitate this. I have some trouble with the A&R Atlas site, kind of differentiating between the forest blocks and the connector
mhm,
information. And I'm wondering whether you'd be willing to see if you can generate a printout that shows, sort of highlights those things. The forest blocks are a piece of cake, but the rest of it gets a little fuzzy. So if you were willing to do that'd be great, and we could sort of put that aside while that information gets generated, because you're so competent in that area.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So we're looking for a map of Putney that's gonna differentiate between forest blocks, connectors. There's A&R uses a number of categories when they're talking about this stuff. So I can, yeah.
Yeah, and I
like
think
them
that-
so that,
I'd be most comfortable in going forward, thinking about regulations based on data from the A&R. What's the big umbrella? The Vermont Conservation Design.
design, yeah.
So that would be most comfortable for me, at least at this point. The issue, one of the issues, and if we're gonna focus on the three blocks, is to define their edges. And there was an assumption that there would maybe a zone along the roads that it might not be appropriate to evaluate all development in those areas initially, because they're typically zoned rural residential with 2-acre development. And that it's, if you were trying to evaluate where we're going to put our review energies, it would be into the development that's going to impact more significantly those forest blocks. So I guess right off the top, I'd like to come to some understanding, if it's possible, about what the perimeter of the forest block is. It's mapped at a scale in the town plan. I don't know whether it could be blown up and be the definitive edge.
That's it. Jeff did that map, and the dark green is the blown up.
The highest priority forest block.
Mhm,
and
yes.
Some
Mhm.
lighter green is the connectivity blocks.
Developments
And,
got
but
out.
I understand what Tiff is saying, and I think we like the underlying zoning for conservation areas. 27 acres is really better than most towns. 27 acre
That's a
lots
lot.
within the conservation area. Hoping that people would go into this value appraisal program with 2 acres for a home. But we definitely want the underlying zoning to stay the same. We change rural residential. In other words, this wouldn't replace.
The same as far as the original standard center.
As far as calculating how many land we have. Allowed. under the current zone.
Is there a date on that?
Oh, so
Can you
you're
get-
saying to keep all the underlying zoning, you just have.
In the fine print.
The underlying zone would definitely change in some cases because it's not all.
It's not all conservation land.
Right.
under
Right,
the
right.
zoning.
That's okay.
Exactly,
So-
yeah.
So, yeah, this is where we need.
So if this is step one, is yeah, this is my homemade map. It's something that I've been using as a tool, trying to understand some other issues. You know, but if we look at the, can I get this? These,
Would it help people if I stood up with this map so that,
I guess it's
Oh, we can hold it up.
maybe, but the idea is, what's solid green in there is an indication of landscape,
I think this is fragile.
landscape.
Yeah, I'll help put it up.
get it up higher than Jeff's map? So I'm gonna stand on my chair.
Yes. And there's more tax if you need them, I should get them. I've got more tax to go.
I've got at least one more. which
Oh,
will
we get a
help
few
us.
more, so it's a little.
Here too.
Can you reach that from that stool?
Yeah, let me get it up. Let me touch it. Push it up. Same. So there's horizontal.
Now it
And you're
is.
going up. Yeah, shouldn't this be higher?
No,
So,
it's probably just your perspective like that.
I think we're good. Yeah.
so I guess we're throwing out ideas.
Yeah.
Then,
I want Jeff's map to be back.
the green CNs are conservation zoning district with the 27-acre minimum lot size. 10-acre minimum lot size, 2-acre minimum lot size. If we look at like this one, the Bear Hill one is maybe simpler than some of the others.
And if that's sort of just directly over the village.
This is
Yeah.
Bear Hill, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So this
Spelling, Matter.
conservation zoning district corresponds, relatively well to that mapping, but there
Yeah.
are some anomalies over here. So it would be, one approach is you leave all the underlying zoning as is, and you define a zoning overlay district that somehow is well mapped and relates to
Yeah.
the three big blocks here, and probably the way this is mapped, it pulls in a little bit from some of these roads here. It is acknowledging that where there is a road, there's typically residential development, and it ends up being a white area on the map, and, the
Yeah.
assumption is it's already.
well, it's not just an assumption or an accommodation for, it's literally a mapping of what is currently at this moment in time forest
Okay,
versus what is not. And so those little cutouts are, I assume, and you all may know this better, I assume the state did this using an algorithm, not, right? So it's some sort of canopy typing with a chosen scale. And then if you have enough, like, hey, I'm a forest, and next to me is a forest, and next to me is a forest, and next to me is a forest, and next, and you build your network like that. And if you have a block that is sitting and, hey, I'm not a forest, and next to me is not a forest, and next to me is not a forest, then you become white, right? And so I think that to some extent, there's a rationale to say, okay, the block is as defined there is the block, right? But it also has strong opportunity to create complications for any kind of administration or management of this, right? You look at the like lower part of this large forest block and, like where does the overlay district end? Where does it start? If you're, this landowner, right?
is he in or out of the?
Are you in, are you out, are you, right? And so do you make the decision that, okay, the overlay district, we choose a type of road, right? And you say, okay, we're gonna give a little buffer to, roads that the town classifies as like 1, 2, and 3. But then inside of that, irrespective of the current amount of forest canopy, it's all important as part of that block. And so the overlay district covers it. Or do you, how much do we simplify this? I think is a critical question. And it's for our own administration as well as the simplicity of residents, right?
Yeah.
Are you in or are you out?
Yeah,
But I think it has some important bearing on the final. And I personally don't like our current zoning because, Anne pointed out that like conservation is supposed to cover the potential for a 27-acre parcel to be eligible for use value appraisal, but because all of our parcels start at the road and then head inward for the most part, there's some very few exceptions, you pass through 3 districts. So the same landowner is in 3 districts, and the way the town zoning addresses a parcel that spans across multiple districts uses a proportionality. So you can subdivide based upon the proportionality of your parcel in each of those districts, which makes it 27 acres mean bupkis. Because, if your parcel goes across 3 districts and you can proportionally subdivide it based upon how much is in each of those districts, you get below 27 acres in a heartbeat. I think some recent subdivision right on Joy Road is,
They did one,
there's been 2 of them
okay, that's the new one.
from both directions. Yeah.
We expected that.
But yeah, I think I just brought up 2 issues at once.
yeah, and they're really big, meaty, complicated issues.
Yeah.
But so
That
if
was
we
my hope.
were to leave underlying zoning alone, because that's an enormous task, I think, beyond the scope of this zoning rewrite.
Well, you would need to take it to that next step to go through and, you know, if you wanted to. Get the community buy-in to completely rezoning all the districts. You know, we could get you set up for that, but to actually get it approved would be another.
And no doubt that it's necessary and.
Right,
Good
this is,
idea.
I agree, it's crazy the way it's set up, and it should all be parcel based at this point.
Yep.
It was set up before there was parcel information, that was easy to access, but.
Yep.
It's a huge project. you're
So
right.
one approach might be, like, let's look at the Putney Mountain block here.
Yeah,
One approach might be to just look at those roads that are being used as sort of boundaries here. And, I mean, without, I could get lost in here.
You're not-
In any
Yeah,
case,
yeah,
if we were to say that that is the boundary of that forest block, kind of following those roads, I guess that would be a very simple way to map and describe the extent of the forest block. What would happen is if there were a development proposed and within that block, and I guess I don't know what happens if there's a development proposed within that block and it's on a parcel that isn't acknowledged as a contributing parcel in the Vermont conservation design because it's white here. Do you just give them a pass and say fine, or do you subject them to the same critical review about the impact of their development on, on this lot, which is been included into the overlay district, but really isn't a significant contributor to
right, so that
it.
depends on how you set up the regulations, and you could do it.
So there may be an out, so
Sure,
the goal then would be simplifying the mapping. It's a very
Right.
clear, easy to
Right.
understand map. And then you get into a secondary layer, which is go find yourself on the map and then look at that lot in more detail. And if in fact you are not included in the Vermont Conservation Design green blob, then, you don't really need to do anything, or you have an exemption.
Right.
That might be
You
one
could- that's an
regulatory
option,
approach.
yes.
Yeah,
but
okay.
those lots are already there, I mean, those people,
Right.
those houses are already there, to give them an exemption is pretty. I have to know when for anything, it's fine with us.
So, and if that's the case,
That like, Jens mentioned just, oh, why don't you finish your thought,
okay,
and then.
so, let's just look at the Bear Hill lot and see whether we could imagine a similar sort of relationship. It conforms pretty well. A lot of it is already in this conservation zoning district. It just happens to be that way. But if we were to define that, I'm just looking at the town plan map. I mean, there's either an existing road or a non-maintained road in this part. So I think you could describe it if we chose to by sort of road boundaries.
Would you then do Westminster for Berlin, would you do the main roads?
I would try as closely as I could to do,
Like this, East Town Farm Road, and then like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's more or less what the forest block
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
Yeah, it
and
looks like
over here
that,
would be Westminster Road.
yes. Yes,
We have-
and
we have an
coming
idea of
down,
what the
and I
buffer
guess
is,
we'd have to look a little more
From the-
carefully in here,
What's
but
we have
maybe.
an idea of what the buffer is.
Like what the
what is-
distance is.
So much going on.
Pip, do you know what the distance that was used to create current zoning? Do you know what the buffer distance was for rural residential versus?
That's 500, 750, so I think it's 750, we could scale it.
They appear to be equal to one another, the rural residential.
Yeah.
and-
750,
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
resource is 10 acres.
yeah.
zoning,
But I guess.
but also
If
another
we,
seven
if
fifty.
we allow underlying zoning to remain as it is, then it's there as an issue, but during review, you're really just looking at what is the impact that's being proposed in terms of the resources of the forest block. And whatever the development is being proposed will be consistent with the underlying zoning, because otherwise you can't do it. You know, and so we're not dealing with that issue at the
Right.
moment. We're
Right.
dealing with, so if that were the case, then likewise with the third block down here, you do the same thing. You circumscribe it with the roads. And we can take a look at where that is. And I think it would be,
River Road.
It's not. I think the road.
I think it would be Cemetery Road here, coming up to here, be Route 5.
South River Road.
It would be River Road.
91,
No, it would just be River Road.
okay.
No, actually,
And
they had
And
one to
91.
91. I mean, they're parallel.
So close, yeah.
Yeah,
they're so close.
actually 91
Doesn't matter.
is, 91 becomes the
Yeah.
H, not River Road.
yeah.
Okay,
once
so
you
we
get
would
to-
just follow,
Yeah.
so that would be a proposal about defining the borders of the three blocks. Then if they were in an overlay district, you could create two types of, well, there may be two types of, it could be residential development. If it's residential development, the only permit, it gets no permit review. Typically, unless it's triggering something else, usually it doesn't. So if it's residential development and it occurs within the forest block overlay district, then you may have a unique review requirement.
You can make it a conditional use or something.
Yeah.
that Require additional.
Yeah, whether you put it into the conditional use, this is sort of a legal thing, whether you put it into the conditional use category or whether there's simply a standalone review process. So I don't know whether that impact review is just its own thing, in some of these regs from other towns, I think it's standalone. They haven't just, gone right into conditional use, but it could be that it is conditional use, and in there, the set of town
Criteria.
regs that are, to be reviewed as appropriate in conditional use review. Well, no, there were a number of, if you remember,
Oh, sure, yeah.
that like linked zoning regs that could be kicked in when you're doing conditional use review. In there might be the forest block thing, so that would be a regulatory path if it makes sense. If it feels like that's something we're all familiar with. Or it could be a standalone DRB review based against a set of criteria specific for that use. If you put it into conditional use review, it seems like you're sort of obligated to go through the state's list of requirements. When we say it's conditional use, you're gonna go through all of the criteria for conditional use. They may, may be a waste of time. They typically aren't reviewed for residential. I'm thinking specifically of this category of residential development.
Yeah, I did see some of them do
Single
do
family.
it that
Yeah,
way,
yeah,
but
okay,
yeah,
so-
maybe
so-
not.
Yeah.
If that's an idea, then, that might, I'm thinking out loud.
Yeah.
That might be a
Yeah.
reason to think that there's a unique DRB review process specific to a set of criteria just for forest blocks. And I think we'll find an example in there.
Yes,
So,
that's-
so that might be a way to structure. For other stuff, that is a conditional use. I don't know whether you warn a DRB conditional use hearing, warn a DRB meeting, and in addition to conditional use and site plan review, and maybe subdivision, and PUD, we then do the fifth one, which is the forest block impact, and we just are there for the evening doing, doing them all. So if that's the case, then that would at least be consistent. We would just have a standalone review process for, when you trigger it, when you're in that overlay district. So
But there's an idea. I wonder if Pip, if we should just step back and see if the Conservation Commission members have some reactions to what you're saying, unless there's something else you really wanted to put on the table.
I guess I was moving right like into regulatory stuff because that's what
Yeah.
our task is,
It's
but
okay.
But you
I'm
put,
just
you
gonna
put a
be
good
there.
interest, you put the problem
I
to
would
solve on the
throw.
table, you've presented some options for how it could be addressed. I think I would welcome now the Conservation Commission to speak to that, and I think as you speak to it, I invite you to say about anything that Pip has suggested here that resonates with you as something to explore. You can also, after that, I would say, what's missing though, and what would make it better, just let's give it, but start with what about it might be workable from your perspective or worth considering. And then what's missing and what would make it better.
I'm not so sure how your way to, my concern, the block is very important, not the fragment any further or least way. So if you choose your way without clear block set, how it work, I'm not sure.
How the sets relate to how the blocks relate to each other.
How much, if you consider current system so much, maybe the fragmentation is keep going certain section instead of protecting the block of forest.
So, okay, what, are you suggesting that the roads could be the edge of the block of the forest that would be protected? Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
yeah, from a mapping point of view.
From a mapping point of view of what things would fall into this overlay district where there'd be a heightened review, it would be determined by the roads, which actually makes the block slightly larger than, the affected area is slightly larger than the block mapped by the state, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It might be one of the most conservative ways, that we can functionally define them.
Or,
How do you
yeah,
feel about that?
conservative or,
It seems practical.
yeah, that,
And I know that's, you're always thinking, how do we operationalize this? Because it comes before your committee. I get it. I suppose a question I might have in terms of a solution offered, in adding a forest block review, in your mind, does that get weighted against the other pieces of the review in any way, since it's part of the overlay? Am I making myself clear?
weighted,
Does it have a different weight than other
Thank you.
uses? So, and I think the answer is, I think what Pip is trying to say, it's another criteria, just like the other criterias, and if it has the same weight, they're all to be reviewed. That's what happens in a review process.
Process, never having done
Yeah.
these kinds of things. If you have 4 other areas that you're weighing now.
Yeah.
And I'm the person who's before your committee, and it meets 3, but not the 4th. Do you give me a pass? Is
Yeah,
that to meet all
it's,
4,
there's,
or-
yeah, it's not a multiple choice, I mean,
I
yeah,
figured it's
no,
not-
go ahead,
It's not
Pip.
an
Yeah.
With a standalone,
So I guess
Maybe
that's,
it'd be different.
because you could, I get where I'm going, let's just be honest, is this a nod? Or is it?
Is it a real review?
Is it a commitment to disallowing any more fragmentation going forward, because it's so critical?
what we haven't talked about is what are the criteria
You're right.
that might be developed?
We have to get
for
to
the
that.
review.
Okay.
Okay, so we haven't even gone there. But in a bigger sense, I would say that most of the DRB reviews are with an expectation that you've gotten pretty far in a regulatory process up to a place where the regs say you may be able to do this with certain conditions. And that's what conditional use review, the concept is. So, it would typically be that, yes, you may be able to have your development if you can indicate that you, the impact, meets certain criteria. So, and if fragmentation is one of them, then now you need to quantify, to what extent is it increasing fragmentation, et cetera. And some of these examples here try to quantify that, like the percentage of a lot that's being affected by the development and setting some standards. So it sort of gets quantitative in that sense. But it, yeah, is that,
Yeah, I think, could you explain the difference? I think I was hearing, you could, do a normal conditional review of something with all the state required, town required aspects. Or you could create a new review for the forest blocks, which would be a standalone, different kind of review. Could you sort of see what you would see happening with this?
yeah, maybe I was going too deep, too fast, but I was making a distinction because we make this distinction in Putney between the rights to develop single family, and I think it's single and
duplex.
duplexes, as a right without any permit review. So that was a category that, I was concerned about, and imagining how this process might work for those people that typically aren't subjected to any review. And then that's why I was imagining when I was just brainstorming, that if we put those applicants into the same review process, conditional use review, which we have as the enabling legislation has outlined it, and we, as a DRB, do it frequently, that it may be a more rigorous review when the issue associated with the single or two-family residential development in the forest block is really just specifically those forest block impact issues. So that would be a reason to think that a standalone review might be useful for them. And if we're creating a standalone review, then it might be simplest to just say that applies to everybody who is in the forest block, regardless of what level of development. And so if your development were to trigger some other reviews, then we'll do the other reviews as well as the forest block. Is that, I mean, it was just an idea.
Yeah.
Is that?
I think some questions this brings up for me are like, practically speaking, if we have a secondary panel of review, does that become a de facto job of the development review board, or does there end up being some alternative review process, right? Is it like the DRB plus the conservation committee, like who might be involved in that review process? And then from another practical standpoint or point of view, I imagine going in front of the DRB has a landowner cost, right? When you are subject to conditional use and you have to pull together some resources or paperwork or something else that indicates the impact of your process on the regulatory landscape. Does that have a cost to the landowner? Is it something that requires engineers, or does it something that requires architects?
Time is something.
Depends on your project, I suspect.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, so it's not like automatically, if you're under conditional use, you probably need an engineering plan for your
No, we
development.
see
Okay.
many of them that are just, the applicant comes in, has met Karen's application material requirements, which are typical for all applications. A narrative and a site plan is really typically all that's there, and it can be a sketch, it doesn't have to be.
So the site plan could be on the back of a napkin. It's not like,
It's not surveyed.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not surveyed.
There's a section
Yeah.
in code that allows the DRB or the zoning administrator, I believe, to
Yes,
require.
to require additional,
what they feel they need.
Yeah.
To evaluate properly.
Yeah.
we just reviewed that yesterday.
I think that we utilize some of that language when we were dealing with river corridors. Where it was like, throw this to a higher power. You're in a river corridor. If you want to prove otherwise, we're gonna need
Yeah.
evidence of that because the evidence doesn't exist on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay, I asked that question because I think there's a simplicity to having a process that is under one house and doesn't add an auxiliary review board or makes us decide like, you know, yeah, whose shoulders does this new burden fall upon? But I was asking the question because I know that some of these review processes they're time consuming, but they can also be expensive or, you know, astronomically, like if you had to get a survey, could completely alter the landscape of who is even able to participate in this process. So
Yeah. I mean,
if that threshold is not particularly high, then, you know, if normal conditional use review isn't going to be an immediate economic barrier to anybody within the overlay district, then maybe it becomes a more attractive choice in terms of just keeping all of this under one roof. But
If you had a standalone reg, couldn't you also make it not onerous in terms of requirements?
Well,
you surely could. No, I was less concerned that the standalone
Mhm.
review would be overly onerous because I imagine whatever we put in that standalone review would parallel whatever we put under conditional use, right? So like however no, you're saying,
no, I mean, I'm saying that the point of it is that we don't need to duplicate it.
Right.
And the concerns or the issues being addressed in conditional use often will not be relevant to a single or two-family house. They're just not the same impacts.
well, I understand. What I was saying is that
That's fair.
if we come up with a set of criteria for review of an overlay district, that set of criteria for the forest block overlay district would be the same whether or not we
mhm.
had that set of criteria live under its own review process or
Or
if it
conditional
lived
use.
under
Yeah.
conditional use. That was,
And I guess if
that was
we're
what I was
taking
saying.
this, your concerns about, not developing a set of review criteria that are going to demand more sophisticated submittals
Analysis.
from the applicants, you know, then we can just take that under advisement and have that, you know, that awareness when we begin to think about what are the criteria that we are concerned about and how is the applicant going to demonstrate their conformance, you know, with that. So that, yeah, so we have already, I mean, we've looked at Marlboro. You were around for
Yes, I
Marlboro.
called Marlboro
So,
and talked
so
to
we
their
talked to-
zoning
yeah,
administrator.
which was really interesting process. So
Yeah.
in my opinion, that zoning requirement in Marlboro would be onerous for a single family development, potentially.
Sure, I was actually less concerned with how onerous the impacts of the review for an overlay district would be, and was just simply curious, what was the starting point of how onerous it was to go through normal conditional
Yeah,
use?
I think it depends on the
So-
intensity of the use. So
Yeah.
for little, small uses, they don't provide very much material, not much is asked for. Everybody kind of knows what the thing is all about.
Yeah,
For more intense uses, you know, there could be 50 pages of documents, you know, and surveys and,
sure.
you know, traffic studies, et cetera.
But what I'm hearing is that taking something and having it live under that conditional use process in the situation of a property, a residential property that normally wouldn't be under conditional use, the normal conditional use criteria would be fairly minimal. A landowner could easily meet them. It wouldn't suddenly, because the regs were living there, wouldn't suddenly make it onerous, or
Well,
but you're not positive.
No, because I'm just saying that the conditional use, we're diving pretty deep into sort of structural issues here, but if, you know, my original point, I think I'm coming to feel is a decent one, which is that a standalone reg allows single and two-family applicants to avoid the complexity of going through a conditional use review process, which is a mandated process from the state with a set of criteria incorporated into our regs that aren't particularly relevant to this issue at all. So,
Okay.
yeah, and it may not require them really filing anything. And we could reconsider this, but I guess we now have sort of just talked about two possible paths. I think we could just leave it at that. You guys might want to think about what you're,
Right.
knowing our regs.
Well, and let me just add that if we can identify the path for forest block and the criteria for that, the process could be standalone for your typical residential rural, which is probably most of the applicants that we would see. But where you have a conditional use permit, you could just fold that into that process versus make it be two different things they have to go through. So we can get at the issue of integrating it because it's easier for everybody. But if it's really just the forest block issue, that it has its own forest block review.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm hearing this conversation saying, it's just clearing, have the criteria and what's required. And if you're already in conditional use and you're in forest block, it just goes right in there. And
But if
you
you're
do that, but if you're not, you have a standalone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's very
Okay.
practical and actually clear.
Now the next.
But let's like,
Thank you.
again,
Yeah,
and then let's hear, does that make sense? Conservation Commission, there's a lot of things we're saying all at once, so I just want to keep checking in to say, how are these things sounding to you when we talk about something like that? Is that making sense? We have a set of criteria, we have to come to what they are. But a process that would just be forest block review, that anybody who's in forest block would have to go to, and if you're residential, you have your own, that's the only issue you do, and if you have other issues, you're in conditional use. And get it reviewed there.
To me, it is standalone with the forest block review seems better to me. I just think Ellen made a good point that we don't want to, if it flipped into, like conditional review on other issues that then were all passed with flying colors, but the forest block review was not doing so well that the person couldn't argue legally that the only thing blocking them from fragmenting the forest was the forest block.
Well, I mean, I think anybody can argue that at any point. I'm just going to say, if they're really digging in, I think we have that problem.
Mhm.
I think it really comes to what Ellen was saying earlier. What are the criteria, right? I think that's what it comes down to. And I think, but we also like administrative ease for everybody. It's just better for everybody because then you
think
don't get
that-
lost in
yeah.
it.
I think
you know?
any of these things are one well-heeled, argumentative landowner away from falling to pieces,
Right.
right?
We have.
Is that fair to say?
Lots, because that only flower to the land.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, I'm sure you said you spoke with Marlboro.
Yes, yeah,
I'm sure you talked about kind of how they look at this. It seems pretty squishy to me.
yes.
Compatible, avoid. Compatible, avoid, it's all over the place.
Yeah, you've just
So-
gotta you have to have the money to find the professionals to hire to write things in
Right.
favor of you,
Then let's just have.
And you get- and you get the stamp.
We have 'em here. Yeah. I think that's why we have Wyndham Regional here to help us, do that. But I think what we've now honed in on is a really critical thing, is to make sure we understand what the criteria are and how they can be demonstrated, right? So, and that's a problem when you do something new, sort of the sort of standard of review. Sometimes it's getting established, but we're not the first ones to do this, so there could be standards of review that others have used that will help those criteria stand up, and
Technical literary review, sort of. I mean, we're looking at other zoning ordinances or talk to Jens.
Yeah.
For sure, and that's where we're gonna come up with these criteria, if that's the way that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
well, our attorneys will look at it. Sure.
Development type lawyer who will come in and say, I can just tear this apart.
But But that said, I would invite the Conservation I would invite the Conservation Commission, we're gonna have Wyndham Regional do this commission, but if you know of criteria used elsewhere that you think we should look at, please get that and give it to us. If you have best practices,
They've given us a bunch of examples.
they already did, thank you. So, and I'm not in that flow, so thank you. Great, but I think that's, I bet you have, and that's a lot. And I also just want to speak to one thing I can imagine in this process when we come to reviewing criteria. You know, let's say we've identified them, we have them on the table, we have a proceeding. I think there's value, and this is picking up something that Andrew said, for Conservation Commission, for them to have your comments on it. It's still a DRB review, but you know, another thing that happens and probably will be happening more now that we have an assistant zoning administrator. We do. Yes, we just hired one. Yeah, yeah, she's wonderful. She's wonderful. And we're sharing her services, well, she services also Rockingham and Wyndham.
Okay.
Oh, good.
So it's not just, you know. Yeah, she's a remarkable person. I think we're very lucky to have her. And she's just starting and she's getting her head around, you know, Putney. But in any case, what I would say is what we hope for going into any kind of DRB review, that it's helpful to have a staff, so to speak, comment on issues. And that happens when you have staff. As we go into looking at forest blocks and this kind of review, I could imagine a role for Conservation Commission to weigh in and say, here's how we see this. And I think it's a really valuable perspective. I mean, in the end, the DRB has to review it and decide.
But that has a lot of
Right. Well, I just think I'm acknowledging that it's really important to have that perspective at the table, and that would be listened to. So that would be, in addition to having criteria, we need to have that expertise.
When I was on the planning commission previously in Connecticut, we would send development reviews, depending on the issues that were coming up or whatever, to various committees. And a conservation commission was often one of those, and it was an advisory.
Yes,
comment,
advisory.
You know, comments, and it was within a certain period of time,
Yeah.
so it didn't extend things, and they had to, you know, respond, and again, it just helped the planning commission to think through all that.
We
Absolutely.
sort of spoke about that yesterday a little bit, right, the sort of quasi-informal review process and who's
Right.
involved.
That's right. And Andrew has
A
something to,
preliminary or sketch
Yeah.
plan,
Yeah.
you know, conversations.
Right.
between
Yeah.
things, yeah.
so Andrew has something he wanted to say.
Alternatively, I think based on my conversation with Marlboro, they baked into their regs,
Report.
yeah, some sort of like
Mhm.
object or deliverable that was coming out of their conservation commission based upon the expertise of the commission at the time. Their commission has seen turnover. Some of the like wildlife expertise that was serving on the commission is no longer present on the commission, and the commission has found themselves floundering without the basis of expertise to fulfill the duty that got wrote into their
Yeah.
regs.
That's,
So I
Yeah.
think that it's
Another
important
level.
to
Yeah.
like
Acknowledge that.
acknowledge that like, we're not all
We're
gonna
all
be here
communities.
forever. And we need to write a reg that has longevity,
That was our
and,
concern.
yeah. And it has come to pass.
So a
It
couple of.
didn't take very long. It wasn't even like, yeah,
A suggestion then might be that, based on your review of some of the samples, and we could see whether mine are the same as what Ann is giving you. That you can begin to see if there are any similarities or areas of commonality. One that I have seen, maybe it's, before we jump into what's a good response to the issue, is to define the issue.
yeah.
If the primary concern here in the forest block is to avoid fragmentation, is that the highest concern?
I think it,
I think it is.
I think going
Okay.
back to what Ogie said, however, that like, and we just went through this with the housing study, is I think what we should do is first brainstorm the potential issues. So fragmentation is one issue, but I think we should brainstorm out those potential issues. So rather than just go into these other potential regs and grab sections and language that sound great, I think we should be on the hunt for solutions to issues. That makes sense.
Not issues.
Well, no, we have to come up with the issues
Okay,
first so that we can go hunting for
I'm
solutions
at
to issues.
I'm at,
Yeah.
let's develop the issues.
Right.
And,
Let's do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so is from a simplifying the regulatory review, which I would be promoting heavily, and maybe using Marlboro as a cautionary tale, I would be most interested in us in requirements that are very clearly stated and maybe easy to understand dimensionally, not too evaluative or qualitative in terms of impact on specific species, et cetera. So one approach is to, if the issue is avoiding fragmentation, and if
Well, Pip, can we
fragmentation means
first, sorry to interrupt, can we first just brainstorm a list of issues?
fragmentation, no, okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
let's do
so
that.
fragmentation is an issue that we all see as.
And
part of
brainstorming
it.
is just go through
Yeah.
them and then we'll discuss.
Are there
them.
other issues?
And fragmentation means creating isolated pockets of forest not connected to others, or by your clearing process, creating those islands? Is
Both.
that, okay.
Yeah, so fragment,
It's fragmentation occurs when a section of forest is cut off from another section of forest.
Yeah, the island,
And-
okay.
This is like.
Watch out for this, yeah.
Just look at this, and this is fragmented.
Yes.
All these little pieces in here, I mean, an animal can come down into here, which is why it's part of the forest block. But this is really this is all.
so this is, I
skunk and
think,
fox
where
Territory down here now, it's degraded, this whole section.
I think
These-
that's where that definition of fragmentation, which is a piece of forest that is separated from the remainder forest, isn't exactly the definition of fragmentation, right? It's like when the forest is functionally separated from remaining forest,
Mhm.
or when
In other words,
the predominance of open land exceeds the predominance of forest cover. Like I think
I
that
hear what
there's
you're
possible
saying. I hear
ways
what
to
you're saying. Like,
define
you could say, well,
fragmentations.
an animal could sneak down through here and cross here, and therefore this is all linked together. It's getting very dicey.
Yeah.
So
So fragmentation is one issue. And we're gonna,
a
yeah,
definition,
and everybody just watch out for this cord, okay?
oh, I thought you were worried about this map.
I'm worried about the cord and
Okay.
and harm, bodily harm, injury,
All right, thank you.
or
Where's the
computer destruction.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
So
Yeah,
fragmentation.
But fragmentation is one issue. What other are, this will that'll get us to our criteria, but what are the
Practice,
issues?
foresting practice.
Foresting practice, okay.
Well, that may be verboten.
but
We may
just-
not be
It's not-
You know,
committed.
here's
to-
what I would say, Pip,
Sorry.
when you do a brainstorm,
Okay.
Just brainstorm.
you get the ideas out
Sorry.
and we let the cream rise to the top,
Okay.
okay?
Then we will discuss.
We will,
Okay.
it's on the list, and I think we should just keep talking about what are the issues that relate
Anne
to
was just
criteria.
concerned about wildlife mobility or connectivity.
Okay, what else is part of the issues that we need to be able
I'm
to
saying
talk?
we should.
Let's, Anne,
Sorry.
no, Anne, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say in relation to that, it's also a concept of core forest. And A&R has identified core forest. I think it's 300 feet from any human activity.
Yeah.
When you start impacting that, then there's real trouble for animals.
Thank you. Goji,
I think one thing we should consider is the stream, I said buffer zone or stream along the stream. We call,
Riparian.
and that's
Yeah.
not just acreage or kind of, we have to think about as along the stream.
Yeah.
So that's the one.
thank you. What else? What other issues will come up as we consider?
The other protections in the zoning should continue to apply, such as protections for vernal pools, class 2 wetlands,
Oh, there,
all those, those stay in place, correct?
yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay, no problem.
No, this is
I mean,
overlaying, it's
yeah.
something new on top of
Yeah.
everything
It's
that
not just
exists.
the acres per
No.
zone,
You
it's
can't
just
undo any,
Okay,
This really comes back to what does it mean, to allow uses within a forest block? What are the issues that will have
The
to
other
be
thing,
considered?
like Bobby was saying, the stream connections, like a
Mhm.
lot of. in
Yep.
The East Putney Forest Block, we have a large number of vernal pools.
Yeah.
Like at least 6, which are linked.
Yeah.
They drain into each other, and that's a route that salamanders can use to move to a slightly different breeding habitats. And I don't know how that's sort of part, if that got broken, then you would have these salamanders unable to have that genetic diversity that this linked set of vernal pools now provides. So I don't know how that would be, other than to say. it. Yeah, I don't know if you can zone.
Well, I mean,
don't
I think
right
we-
now, we're just coming up with
We're
the
just
issues.
talking about issues, that's what
And
we're
then we
doing.
can
Right.
search for, have others
Right.
implemented solutions, what solutions can we brainstorm, what are the pros, what are the cons?
So I'll bring another one up.
Are
That's-
we legally even allowed to do it, is Pip wanted
And
to
zoning is
interject.
not gonna be the best answer for all.
It's not,
For all
but what are the
yeah.
things of concern? I'll just, another one, it's related to what Gurjit was saying about riparian areas, but it's really the movement of water through the landscape, right? So if there's a development that changes how water flows, that can fundamentally change the habitat for the forest and the animals. So it's just another issue of water flow through the landscape, is what I would say.
I wrote normal hydrology.
Thank
if
you.
Want some language.
I love that.
And core forest also relates to whether or not an animal feels free to have babies there. And also, there has to be more than one site, because a lot of animals move there, they're disturbed by a predator or something.
So effect on breeding grounds,
They
right?
they'll move to a different site.
Yeah.
To raise those young. I include ravens nesting.
Mhm.
Although we did have ravens successfully next to the Forest for Learning classroom number 5 with a bunch of active children in it.
Some of
And who
these
was louder?
creatures are very resilient.
Who was louder?
Yeah.
The ravens or the kids?
Crows hold a grudge for 17 years.
I heard something about that.
I always wonder the number of data points that go into a
Right.
study, right? Like you can't have replicated the crow grudge study. Like how many times can you have? Yeah, there is some very fun studies where they like had somebody harass crows and then they made masks that other individuals would
Yeah.
wear and they would get harassed by crows within the same city. I just wonder like how many groups have replicated the crow harassment study to come up with the
Right.
data point, but
So,
yeah.
so are there other issues when we talk about
Mass
forest?
stands, destroying mass stands that are
Yeah,
primary food for wildlife.
How would you refer to that, nest?
Yes.
MAST, like nuts.
Yeah,
Nuts
no,
And soft net, like blueberry.
well,
Food.
define, isn't mast specific to
Yeah.
trees?
yes,
Mast
I think
comes, as Ann just said, mast is generally, you can have
Hard.
hard mast or you
And
can have
soft.
soft mast. And it is any naturally occurring, like, it's plant-based, right? So it's any naturally occurring nut, fruit, whatever.
I
whatever.
didn't know was included.
So like
soft.
oaks and beech have like hard mast, and then
I've never
raspberries and
heard this
blueberries
soft-
are our soft
Never heard
mast.
that soft
Blackberries.
mast thing, so
Yeah,
that's new to
Black
me.
cherry is soft mast.
Yeah.
see,
Makes sense, though.
thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of our soft mast sources are ephemeral. You think of raspberries and blackberries are more ephemeral than say your hard mast.
Right.
But yeah, some like
try
blueberries
to get
are
them
not
out. Yeah.
ephemeral. You want them to be,
But it's wildlife food
But, yeah.
source, and so
It's a
mast
wildlife
is a
food
part of
source,
that.
yeah.
That's a
And
major
A
one.
lot, I think a lot of literature sort of thinks of hard mast.
Yeah,
It's-
but what you, again, the fundamental issue is really food sources for wildlife, and mast is one key way of looking at that, so
Like a
I,
new shoot, which idea.
Yeah.
That's a different,
Yeah.
Right.
it's all.
what other
Very-
All
issues
thinking,
do you
yeah,
think?
nuts and berries, yeah.
So I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking, are there other issues if we were to create, then we'll come to criteria, but what are the problems, what are the things we're trying to focus on, other issues?
Pretty good list.
I think
That's a pretty good list.
yeah.
All right, we've exhausted it. When people start telling jokes, you know that you've ended, okay. So that's good.
A task associated, maybe to sort of switch, would be to just review our existing regs, because we do have reference to wetlands, vernal ponds, and riparian setbacks in our reg.
Yeah,
And it's whether or not they would be, those existing
Yeah,
regulatory controls are adequate. Yeah, in which case those issues are being addressed in any case.
Right.
everywhere in town.
and if they are, how are they referenced otherwise in a review for, a forest block
Right.
affected area? So, yeah, don't duplicate, but reference, and there might be additional criteria or issues that have to be addressed.
so I
So what else, what's next useful on here? That was trying
I
to get at
was-
the
I
issues.
was thinking with issues in place. Like, it sounds like we've dumped on Wyndham Regional Commission. A massive load of various regs from other towns.
Yes,
I don't know if I've characterized that correctly, because I haven't
I think
seen.
we have a significant
The full
number
pile.
of examples to.
But I
refer to.
do wonder whether or not. Is there a role for us to play in some of the sorting of, now that we have issues?
Well,
Like,
we love
are we
your
expecting that you're going to do all that sorting of like, hey, we found this one and this one and this one that address those issues you brought up? Or should we have an active role in?
I think it would be great for you to look at them and become more familiar with them for sure, just your own
Yeah.
knowledge base.
Yeah. I mean,
And
yeah,
also to let us know, right, we don't live here, so.
Yeah,
We think this would work particularly well, this situation, but not law. but-
this is to review what other towns have, is what you're saying.
Right.
Is there an easy way for you to deliver to saying, here are the things we'd like you to look at? Because if I had that task right now, I wouldn't even know how to start.
Yeah, I tried to find some regulations.
So this is how,
Not that I'm
I mean, I would-
technologically talented.
I would just go through the list and.
The list that you
Google
have.
regs Of that town,
Zoning regulations, Google it, Heinsberg zoning regulations.
but if you want us to provide a link or something. we can-
Well, if you just give us the list, that's great. I mean, but I just don't know which towns. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot of towns in Vermont. so-
I mean, if you're finding, if
Define
you,
it.
so Anne gave you a list of towns, but not the actual regs.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Correct,
if
but
you're,
they're easy enough.
if you're going through the process of finding those regs, then you could create.
The links.
We'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's like in a Google document or something where we can all find those, because. I think if we,
It's not hard.
if you read through those regs and you put like, oh, this one deals with fragmentation, this one deals with. Wildlife connectivity. Here's a reg that deals, and then once you've identified what they're connecting to, then you can start. Comparing and contrasting regs and say, ooh, like, I can see how that one's weak, or I can see how this one would be impractical, or we could.
Yeah.
As individuals, we can start to sort of rank them, and maybe
Right.
that leads to.
Yeah.
something.
And I'll just say procedurally, because now I have to think about that with open meeting law and all of that, and my brain goes there. As we're researching, as Wyndham Regional Commission is researching this, we're going to actually, at the February 4th meeting of the advisory committee, we're gonna have a list of the issues, like big picture issues, like not all the details, that will need examination, during the review. And we'll then set a schedule for when we're going to review them. We're not gonna do them all in one meeting, right? There's gonna be a whole series of meetings. So we can schedule when the review for forest blocks, natural resource conservation is coming. And if we have things to look at, this is a long-winded thing, we actually can't use Google Docs in open meeting law. I just have to say that.
I was just suggesting as a place for us to have
Right.
links.
Well, I
to
have
click for-
an alternative solution. And that is that the project page, which I would like to bring to life, for this project on the town website, you can actually create a document, a Word document that says Town of Heidelberg and have the link there, and you can still click on it. And it's accessible to everybody. So it's my alternative to Google Docs. I'm not trying to shoot down the idea. I'm just saying open meeting law would require us, if we're going to have something that other people can look at. I mean, obviously the advisory committee, could look at it when we're preparing for that topic. We can put that out. And so in the meantime, if it's a near-term thing for us to do, you can share it, just send it around and we'll do that. But I think ultimately it needs to be shareable with everybody on the advisory committee. And my role, my view is for each meeting that we have a set of documents and materials, and that would be a great way to do it. And it could be that we set up a place, and I could do this on the project website, I think, is have something that's sort of, it's not just meeting based, but issue based. So here's materials regarding forest blocks, and let me look to see if I can do that with the town website. It looks like it could. I just need to find out if that would be.
Just a clarification, there's no place for comments.
Not yet, no, they don't do that, so I know. But
I mean,
we will, we will set up a process to receive comments, how we did it in the town plan. It is clunky, I just wish we had
well,
something
some of
better.
that clunkiness is related to open meeting law.
It is. I mean, we live with it.
We can't just have commission members having a dynamic conversation process on the internet that isn't recorded in a way that the
Well-
public can view and participate in, so.
But I do wish we had an inbox where people could just send comments that then we
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
available to the public, because then whenever I receive comments by email,
It's terrible.
yeah, I have to find them and, yeah.
Having PTSD. Russian.
So I will create that document. and I'll send it to you.
Send it to me.
As well.
That'd be great. Yeah, yeah, because we're gonna review it all. And-
Before we, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, thank you,
And
Mike.
also appears to have.
And then Anne and then Pip.
I just want to get back to Andrew's, comment way back toward the beginning. And make sure that issue isn't dropped.
Which is?
Like the calculating of, like you run through more than one current zoning. Area with your land, how do you calculate? The how many houses you can have, but also how can you sort of slant that? So maybe two of the landowners end up having the 27 acres, no matter if they're in, like resource or. In other words, when you figure that all out, do you end up with landowners who in fact have 27 acres and can be in use value appraisal? With the forested piece that they own, and then you have two acre lots for people who care less about forestry. Who just wanna have a house with some trees around it or something.
I'm not,
Does that make any sense?
I didn't get that.
I'm
I'm already jumping ahead to clustering housing, but I just don't wanna drop Andrew's original comment about how the underlying zoning will affect the seller. There's a big landowner. But we ask that if he's gonna develop the land.
to
the housing
cluster.
be clustered, there has to be some kind of foresightedness. Also, it's always bothered me that landowners can just chip off a place at a time. A lot at a time. With no future planning, when you know damn well that they intend to sell multiple lots over time. And I don't know if that, in other words, I think. It's gonna get complicated when we look at how land owners can have the amount of lots that they're supposed to have. And not,
Yeah.
Sort of,
It'll
how
help
they get clustered.
Incremental
Yeah.
defragmentation, yeah.
Go to a more parcel base, or if you have a more parcel base zoning scheme, does that make sense?
Yeah,
It does,
but
but
sort
I
of
think that-
regardless of your scenario about subdivision and sort of the opportunities to create multiple lots. it will never be in excess of the underlying zoning. You can't, if you own a parcel that includes an area in the 2-acre zone, 2-acre district, you can legally subdivide and create parcels in that 2-acre that are 2-acre. So that's kind of a basic assumption about the rights,
I see.
the rights of the landowner that based on this, and
We
that
don't want to
portion,
make Resource part of the conservation district.
that conservation district, I mean, it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's just our 27-acre, but this,
I know.
I don't want to drag this down, but
Right, it
one
would
thing
be
I
kinda
did,
nice to find this too.
That's what I.
Yeah.
Resource-
One way or another, whether it's
Yes,
27 or
that's
10.
Yeah,
always
yeah,
been.
yeah, and if- I have some concerns that this could be a significant amount of work to try to define what's going on here. We haven't really had a thorough natural resources inventory in town. And we don't have a basis to make a lot of these evaluations. If you have on your list concern about the loss of mast, dry or wet mast,
There's no research on that.
there's no one, yeah, we don't have any mapping to show us where it exists, nor do we have anyone qualified in town to make a determination about whether a proposal is going to have that impact. So I think by default, some of the regulatory approaches are very simple. It's just try to create a percentage of your lot that you are allowed to clear. Try to have some dimensional requirements, perhaps for buffers, so that there's always some zone left. And you don't go too much deeper than that, on the assumption that limiting the amount of clearing will be accomplishing your goals. And so.
It's essentially the basis for all of Vermont conservation design, right? If you leave forest in place, hopefully some proportion of it will be core forest, and some proportion of it will have vernal pool linkages, and some proportion of it will have natural hydrology, and some proportion of it will have hard and soft mast.
Right.
So I think, yeah,
But if we are going to, unless we're going to take a really significant change and say that this lot cannot be developed because it's in the middle of that forest block. If we were to do that, that's an incredible change in the perception of the landowner's rights. And we would need to build that one up, and it'd be very strongly justified in making that move. Another approach is to say, well, there's always the possibility that a development like that could occur. We now need to evaluate the impact of the road. You can control the length of the road to a certain extent to try to minimize that. But if we are going to acknowledge that that right of that landowner exists, then it's us to, on us to try to come up with some criteria to minimize that, but accept the fact that that's the best you're going to do, is
Right.
minimize, you're
And
not going to eliminate.
And I'll just comment, Pip, that there's only so much zoning can do. And so from a municipal policy perspective, sometimes you have to look at incentives, and also from a state perspective. And there are some things that put money on the table to keep forest in forest. That's a relatively new thing in terms of current use incentives, is maintaining old forest. And so I just think, as we can see what zoning can do, Pip's right, there's limits to what can be done towards the goal. But what are the other kinds of policies and programs, either at the state or municipal level? And some of it's about roads. I think that's a good example. It can be stormwater management, it can be another. There are tools that we can have otherwise that can offer incentives.
Yeah.
And so those have to be thought about. I mean, I think we can't solve everything through zoning.
No.
And I invite the Conservation Commission and Wyndham Regional to say complementary, policies and programs are these things, because you can't accomplish everything through zoning.
Working with landowners to protect.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Conservation easements or what have you, agricultural easements.
And, we have. Oh, about that, somebody's, or not. super responsive.
Yeah, but
yeah.
again, on the one hand, here's
Yeah.
zoning and here's other policies, and I mean, we don't have any, if we had any silver bullets, we would have already, you know, used them.
I
So,
just do want to point out, to skip Bear Hill, but at the end of Bear Hill Road. Spelled BARE. The US Geological Survey calls this feature BEAR Hill. Right here, this is an entire Act 250 development in here.
yes, right.
With certain
Yeah.
restrictions. And I think that the town should just be, I mean,
What
a
is
lot
it?
of times.
There's a pre-approved Act 250 development there.
Yeah, there is, it's a
Yeah.
housing for housing development.
All of the, actually, I pointed to the wrong place. This is an Act 250, Bear Hill Road, spelled BEAR in the application to the state. All of the houses here are part of a Act 250 development. There was a section of road that went up here that was not approved by the state, but the landowner started to put it in. And development in here at that point in time, that road was shut down. The state would not allow it because they hadn't been asked first. You know, that kind of situation. But there's one lot in here, which is a no-build lot, no build at all. There are wetland protections built into the Act 250. There's a number of things going on with the Act 250 there, and also Warden Road, which just
Mhm.
really
Over there.
messes up.
Yeah, it does.
Right here, I live there.
Act
This
250,
was
yeah.
a 1970s Act 250 developed, every place on Warden Road, including the house with the private driveway that goes all the way out here. Any house served by Warden Road at this point, because when the town upgraded the road, they made this restriction and the state accepted it. Any land that's serviced by this road is under Act 250 restrictions. And one of them, of which the problem with the state rules like that is that they never know what's going on. I mean, there's supposed to be no vegetation manipulation on that road, or, you know, drastic changes. Unless it was first checked with them. Nobody ever checks.
Right.
Um,
But so there's always the problem of regulation and how to make sure that
well,
it's
it's about,
implemented.
you know, the town can't
Yeah, they can.
tell landowners what the state requires them to do. It's not
Right.
the town's
No.
job. But on the other hand, it's sort of bad if people don't understand that there are restrictions.
Right.
Um,
Well,
so
it's
I
a-
don't know how
I
that
thought
Yeah.
it was, I wasn't sure where you were going with that, but you see it all, you see my
works.
outline.
Oh,
That's why I outlined that, is that
that's the
that-
word, that's the.
and
Act
no
250.
further subdivision is likely to be permitted in there without Act
Mm.
250 review. They've sort of, it's all been maxed, so basically, that portion of your green block, it has pretty significant protections already. So then
Well,
there's this
protections
portion-
against subdivision.
But not cutting down the whole forest, which.
Right,
Yeah,
I mean,
There-
that's
there is
different
a-
from,
Actually, there
Forest
is a
cover.
restriction.
but Anne is saying that there
But
is
no
a
one
restriction on forest
enforces it.
cover. But no one enforces
one
but whether
enforces
it's,
it.
yeah,
Someone just goes ahead and does it.
right. So I mean, I just,
Somebody would have to bring that up as an issue.
I was just
No
gonna say,
challenge.
somebody could create a suit. I mean, I think
I've
that could be a
gotta get
role,
going.
yeah, and it's, well, okay.
But
Cause
I just want
Okay,
to
fine.
have you
Yeah.
have some help in there before you
Alright.
figure that out.
All right, well, then let's wrap this up because we are losing people. We lost Mike, we're losing Andrew.
He had to go get his kids.
And I will
Yeah,
just be
that's what I
very,
have to do.
I would be very apologetic for the misunderstanding about the time start. The agenda did have it both ways. I read it as 1:30 because that's what it said. But apologies and for the inconvenience. I feel like we covered a lot of ground here. I think I want to thank Pip for providing this map and really deep thinking about this. And I think we begin to map out where we could go. I think the big work is to work on criteria. But there may be other issues in zoning that the Conservation Commission would like to bring to our
I
attention.
do, some of them are, but there are a couple of very technical things in here that I
Okay.
used to Pip.
Okay, if you gave it to
I-
Pip,
I-
then
No, I need that. Can you,
send that,
yeah, could you send it as a document?
or you can hand
Email
it to
it.
one of us, we'll get it around. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll scan it and get it around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It says, how we define, setbacks and buffers, because there's two different definitions where to make it from.
Yeah.
And, I have a question, at some point somebody suggested, and he was in the state government, requiring any new development have access to an existing class 3 road.
That's interesting.
And I,
Were you talking to me?
No, I just,
Oh.
that's interesting. Yeah, that would be popular.
I don't think it'd be very popular. Put it out there anyway.
I mean, I had been just the other day on a bike ride thinking to myself that within a forest overlay district, you might consider a reg that said like the town will never adopt a private road that is in a forest overlay district or something like that,
Then
right?
I-
Like, yeah. Right? It's not the intended purpose of this zone of land. So anyway,
Yeah, that's a good one.
Those are another
I
good
think
thing,
that
okay.
there's. My final comment was, I do think we all need to do our homework. We've asked Wyndham Regional Commission to cover a whole lot of zoning topics as part of this grant deliverable. This is one that's important to me, but it's a minor, or it's only one piece of this multi-piece puzzle. So I think we can't just dump 5 sets of example regs on
Right.
them and ask them to sort through it. I think we need to take the list that we just came up with of issues we think could possibly be addressed and start as individuals digging through those regs to find examples of things we think do a good job of addressing those issues and move from there. Because otherwise,
That'd be great.
Who has not seen this? Okay, then I'll send out a link. You can see it online. And in the back are examples of development review standards to address some of these specific
Great.
Yeah.
issues.
Give me the title, I'm just gonna take a picture. I take notes now.
I may have extra copies.
Conserving Vermont's natural.
I just saw this the other day, but yeah.
Oh, sorry, this one is community strategy.
I don't think
Strategies.
I have some. Actually.
Community strategies for Vermont's forests. and
I got a
wildlife.
biggie otherwise.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you very much, Andrew.
Thank you all.
All right, my question now, as we
It's just-
conclude conclude this meeting, do we need another kind of conversation about this together? I mean, we're gonna be eventually bringing it to the whole process, and we'll have advisory committee meetings and we'll be chewing on these things. This was really helpful to get our hands around the issues and some approaches. Is there a need to have a further in-depth conversation from either a Conservation Commission's perspective or PIP, your perspective?
Yeah, we need to talk about it. I think it depends on where you feel you are in having received information about the issues and whether you feel that's enough to begin to develop
I think so.
a response, okay.
Well, let's go with this one, and the follow-up is to review other town regulations. We've identified a number of issues.
Yeah.
We've talked about an approach to how this might be addressed.
Deadline.
Yeah, and that's what I'm working right towards that. I'm trying to figure out what the work is. Trying to work out what is the work. Yeah, well, I agree with that. I think it would be good to have it by the end of the month, any.
January.
Yeah, I mean, if there is any additional issues, I mean, I think let's try to look through the regs and see what we can learn.
So is that what we're doing by the end of January? Is
The
that it's about
31st.
The regs, and we will read them and we'll.
If that seems reasonable, I mean, we want to keep the process moving forward. The meeting on the 4th of February, we'll really be writing a schedule for when we're going to address these in depth in the zoning reg review between now and July. I mean, there's a long timeline. We figure this topic is going to take a lot of time. It might take a couple of meetings. I may not do it all in one meeting. But
I'd like to get other, you know.
we're trying to like map out our work, like what do we have to do, and then assign dates to doing it, and that way we can all get prepared for those things like materials to send out to people to look at before the meeting, that kind of thing. But it would be great if we had that by the end of the month. I am personally not gonna have time to do that because I've got the housing needs assessment and a grant to write, and I'm not gonna do that. But if you can do that and provide feedback, and maybe Pip will have time for that, that would be terrific. That's the big job between now and then. And share that back, and I think that helps inform
I'll
what,
share it back to you.
actually, I say share back. This is my role. The consultants get it. So it would be to Sue Westa and Mike McConnell, right, to both of you. And copy Pip and Sue. And then we don't cross the line on open meeting law. And make sure that we see that those issues are being addressed as we set up agendas and everything. But we rely on the consultants to actually work with the material and help us figure out how we're going to address it. But we will be copied on it. How's that? Does that work for you, Sue?
Sure.
Okay. That's how I'm doing it in the housing, is send it to the Moines, copy me. And then make sure we. You already got that one warmed up, okay, great. Any other questions, feedback, suggestions before we adjourn? Other than please, let's be clear about the start time.
And are we gonna mutually figure out when we're gonna meet again?
We haven't decided that we need to meet again, unless do you think we need to meet again?
I think it depends on what we hear from.
The point of time would have a good sense of other towns and have a good sense of what we think best with Putney or the best.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's gonna be in a work session with the project advisory committee. What we're trying to do now is just get our hands around what do we need to address so that we have allocated time in the review process.
Well, I'll just let the conservation committee know when that
Yeah.
advisory committee meeting is in case they want to come in and.
Yeah, and we'll be working on that schedule. That's what we'll be talking about on the 4th of February, what that schedule might look like. If you have other issues that you come up with, please forward them, it'd be great. I'm gonna copy this and I will send this to Sue and Mike and Andrew and Pip.
Sure.
So,
And I know this isn't your job, but is it your sense that the FEMA amendments that went through, I can send you some stuff about Article 44, Chapter 1. No, maybe.
No, I'm not a FEMA person. So
Maybe we'll find.
other
someone-
people in the
we'll
office
find someone
are.
At the state.
Well, Alyssa.
Alyssa's
in
the
our
person,
office.
yeah.
Mhm. Increasing the base flood just arbitrarily by 4 feet. Another